In this presentation, I want to talk about revenue forecasting. This video focuses on how we can use industry information and corporate disclosures to forecast a company's future revenues. Well, before presenting any further details on the topic, let me highlight the importance of the content we already discussed in Unit 1. Well, an effective forecast model must be based on a thorough understanding of a company's business, which basically entails the understanding of its management, strategy, external environment, and historical results. Thus, an analyst begins with a review of company and its environment, its industry, key products, strategic position, management, competitors, suppliers, and customers, among other factors. While using this information, an analyst identifies key revenue and cost drivers and evaluates the likely impact of relevant trends, such as economic conditions and technological developments. An analyst's understanding of the fundamental drivers of the business and an assessment of future events provide a basis for developing inputs to the forecast model. So, I basically want to highlight that the starting point for revenue forecasting is the industry analysis and the firm strategies, basically steps 1 and 2 of the 6-step evaluation process. So please make sure you review that content before moving on with this presentation. Let's begin our discussion on the process for forecasting revenues. Well, first thing you need to understand is that the revenues are the life and blood of any business. This is what helps the firm cover the operational costs. Hence, revenue forecasting is the most important component in valuing a firm. However, it's very challenging to forecast revenues as there are so many different factors that can affect future revenues. So, for example, we can have economic downturns or maybe upturns, changing trends or fashions if that affects the industry you're analyzing. The increasing competition is always a major factor, and changing laws and regulations are always up there on the horizon. So in this very important presentation video, we'll learn about forecasting revenues. One needs to realize that most companies receive revenues from multiple sources, such as multiple business segments, geographical sources, or product lines. Hence, for accurate forecasting, we need to analyze revenues from these diverse sources. So, for example, in geographical analysis, the analyst places a company's revenue into various geographic buckets. These buckets may be narrowly defined, such as individual countries, or broadly defined, such as by region of the world. A geographical analysis can be particularly useful for global companies operating in multiple countries with different underlying growth rates or competitive dynamics. For example, a company may be experiencing relatively slow growth in one region of the world and relatively fast growth in other regions. By examining each region of the world separately, analysts can enhance their understanding of the overall growth. In breakdown by segment, the analyst classifies the company's revenue into various business segments. Many companies operate in more than one industry or market niche, with widely differing economics. Although information is often available for different business segments, analysts should make an independent judgment about whether a company's chosen segmentations of its business is relevant and material. Well, sometimes analysts can regroup reported information in a manner that helps make important points. Finally, a product line analysis provides the most granular level of detail. A product line analysis is the most relevant for a company with manageable small number of products that behave very differently, in fact. But when these different products are combined, they account for most of the company's sales. Well, enough said about the theory. Let's look at an example. Let's say you're analyzing a Denmark-based biopharmaceutical company, Novo Nordisk. The company provides detailed disclosures of revenue along geographical diversification, business segments, and product lines. Here's a snapshot summarizing the company's sales by geographic regions. All figures are in millions of euros. Well, based on these numbers, we observe that company derives most of its revenues from North America and Europe. Roughly about 70% of its revenue in 2011 is generated in these two regions. It is also worth noting that company's revenue in North American regions has increased by 45% over the past 2 years. The company is also increasing its presence in the international markets, as seen by a 37% growth in these regions. The company also classifies revenue into business segments. Basically, its company has 2 business segments, diabetes care and biopharmaceuticals. And within each segment, actually, the company discloses several individual product lines. It's worth noting that the company generates most of its revenue from diabetes care business segment, and the most important product line is the modern insulin. While we observe that the revenue for most of the product lines have been increasing during the past 2 years, the company's new product, the Victoza, has seen tremendous growth. Well, that caught my attention right away, and to be able to understand or able to forecast future revenue, I probably need to do more research on this product. Well, in any way, once you have developed an understanding of the important components of a company's revenues, we are ready to forecast future revenues. And there are several ways about doing that, and we'll discuss about 3 different approaches. The first one we are going to talk about is a top-down approach for forecasting revenue. A top-down approach usually begins at the level of overall economy. Forecasts can then be made at more narrowly defined levels, such as sector, industry, or the market for a specific product, to arrive at a revenue projection for the individual company. 2 common top-down approaches to modeling revenue are growth relative to GDP growth and market growth and market share. In a growth relative to GDP growth approach, the analyst first forecasts the growth rate of nominal gross domestic product. The analyst then considers how the growth rate of the specific company being examined will compare with nominal GDP growth. The analyst may use forecasts for real GDP growth to project volumes and a forecast for inflation to project prices. And remember, revenue is the product of volume and prices. Analyst often thinks in terms of percentage point premiums or discounts derived from a company's position in industrial life cycle. For example, if the industry is in introductory phase, growth, maturity, or decline. Or they could have premium or discount based on business cycle sensitivity. For example, an analyst's conclusion may be that a healthcare company's revenue will grow at a rate of 2% above the nominal GDP growth rate. The forecast may also be in relative terms. Thus, if GDP is forecast to grow at 4% and the company's revenue is forecast to grow at 15% faster rate, the forecast percentage change in revenue would be 4% times 1 plus 0.15 or 4.6%, or 0.6% higher in absolute terms. In a market growth and market share approach, the analyst first forecasts growth in a particular market. The analyst then considers the company's current market share and how that share is likely to change over time. For example, if a company is expected to maintain an 8% market share of a given product market, and the product market is forecast to grow from 18.75 billion euros to 20 billion euros in annual revenue, the forecast growth in company's revenue is from a level of 8% times 18.75 billion equals to 1.5 billion to a level of 8% times 20 billion euros or 1.6 billion euros. In contrast to the top-down approach, a bottom-up approach begins at the level of individual company or a unit within the company, such as individual product lines, location, or business segments. Analysts then aggregate their projections for the individual products or segments to arrive at a forecast of total revenue for the company. Moreover, analysts can also aggregate their revenue projections for individual companies to develop a forecast for the product market or industry or the overall economy. For example, we can forecast the future growth rate in revenues based on the historical growth rates, assuming that these historical growth rates are going to persist. That's a pretty naive approach. Another approaches for bottom-up methods are capacity-based measures that are more applicable for retail industry, for example, Walmart. The forecasts are generally based on same-store sales growth and sales related to the new stores. Let's take an example of a clothing retailer who has several stores in operation with 2 new stores about to open. Using information based on sales per square meter of existing stores, perhaps during their initial period of operation, the analyst can forecast sales per square meter of the new stores that, added to the forecast of similar type of existing stores, would give a sales forecast for the company as a whole. In making such a bottom-up sales forecast, the analyst would be making assumptions about selling prices and merchandise cost. Forecasts for individual retailers could be aggregated into forecasts for the group, continuing in a bottom-up fashion. Finally, a hybrid approach combines elements of both top-down and bottom-up analysis and can be useful for uncovering implicit assumptions or errors that may arise from using a single approach. Continuing with our previous example of the Dutch biopharmaceutical company, let's assume there's an analyst Wu following European pharmaceutical companies for his clients in China. Wu projects that the global nominal GDP will grow at 5% annually over the long run. He also finds that the incidence of diabetes is escalating globally because of increasingly unhealthy diets and lifestyles. As a result, Wu believes global sales of diabetes drugs will grow 1% faster than the nominal GDP over the long run. Wu, who's also following Novo Nordisk's diabetes care segment, he believes that this particular segment will decline linearly over the next 4 years from its growth rate in 2011 to the projected long-run growth rate of 6%. The reason could be because the short-term growth rate, which is pretty high and is unsustainable, and that has to revert back to the long-term mean of 6% in this case. Hybrid approaches are, in practice, the most common approaches used for forecasting revenues. Well, that's enough for now. In the next video, we'll learn how to forecast net income and dividends. Again, I would like to highlight that the industry and company analysis are the essential tools for forecasting. Please make sure you review that content before moving forward.